Welcome for part two of our history lesson for the ethnic identities and how they developed. And we're going to catch up from, if you remember, last time we had the Emperor Claudius telling the senators that did not want the new members from the conquered Gaul decades earlier. They did not want them in the Senate, so the Claudius told them, well, weren't you Samnites, Etruscans, weren't you other people that resisted Rome, and weren't your forefathers against Rome once, but now look at you, you became senators, so who are you to tell not other populations that Roma conquered? Who are you that you do not want these people to join the Senate? And if one reads the Christian poets in the early 5th century, such as Prudentius, for example, Prudentius says that the design of providence, they intend, I quote, for all barbarians to become Romans, and that through the mingling of blood, a single lineage will emerge from different peoples. End quote. So Claudian, another poet of the same era, so we got Emperor Claudius and the poet Claudian. So Claudian was another poet of the same era, like Emperor Claudius, centuries before, praises Rome because it is the only empire that has always known how to absorb defeated peoples in the name of a common goal that must embrace all humanity. And Rome has given, I quote again, the name of citizens to the vanquished, so that from the Rhone to the Orontes, we could almost say from London to Baghdad, we are one single people. Indeed, one single people, the Romans. See, being Roman means something that is not so obvious. There are political choices pursued with great conviction over a long period that ensure being Roman does not mean being born in Rome and like having a certain hair color or even speaking Latin. It means sharing a set of values and accepting a shared political authority. And it's curious how, in this sense, even the Greeks are forced to modify their point of view. The Greeks, who had built their identity centuries earlier on being different from everyone else, are now partners with the Romans in managing this vast empire. In this immense empire, Latin is spoken in the western part, while Greek is spoken in the eastern part, but it's still the Roman Empire. And in a sense, we notice that at the time when Christianity was spreading, the Greek church fathers used the term Greek somewhat like the emperors used the term Roman, meaning someone who accepts our values. Thus, we find archbishops and other church members, such as Gregory of Nazianzus, if I spelled that correctly. It's a very long name, corresponding with a Roman general of barbarian origin. Now, the phenomenon of immigration was overwhelming in the vast empire, and immigrants were now reaching high ranks in the military and the state. And Gregory of Nazianzus writes to this Magister Militum, a Roman general who's known to be of barbarian origin, and tells him that, quote, your proof there being Greek or barbarian is a difference of bodies, not of souls. In terms of bodies, Germans, end quote. In terms of bodies, Germans are tall, blonde, and distinguishable, but the difference stops there. Quote, it is not a difference of souls. The distance lies in the places of origin, not in the customs and will. So not only, end quote, I just need to catch up. So not only can one be Roman if one wants to, one can even be Greek if one wants to, although everyone remembers that one's father or grandfather came from some illiterate tribe beyond the border. And to conclude with this case, the Greeks in the Greco-Roman Empire, in the end, are so drawn to this broad concept of Roman identity that even the Greeks stop calling themselves Greeks and begin to call themselves Romans, starting from the era of the barbarian invasions. When the western part of the empire goes its own way and the Roman Empire survives only in its eastern part, governed from Constantinople, because you had two capitals. One was Rome, but then the Emperor Constantine decided to make the center of the empire in Constantinople. That empire, which we call the Byzantine, is actually an absurdity because it is the Eastern Roman Empire. So naturally, the emperors who sit in Constantinople continue to call themselves Roman emperors, even though they speak Greek and their subjects increasingly become accustomed to calling themselves Romans in Greek. They continue this way until very recent times, throughout the Middle Ages and the modern era. The Greeks did not think calling themselves Greeks and referred themselves as Romans, because if we think about it, the Eastern Roman Empire lasted longer than the Western part. So there are many amusing consequences for this. When around the year 1000, the Turks coming from the steppes of Asia arrived in Anatolia, in Asia Minor, coming into contact with what we call the Byzantine world, and asked what place was that? And they were told it was Rome. The Turks then called Anatolia Rum, R-U-M, creating a sultanate calling the Sultanate of Rum, because to them it was still understood to be Rome. Now, the Greeks, as mentioned, continued to call themselves Romans until the 19th century, when Western philologists, enamored with classical culture, explained to the Greeks, that they were descendants of Pericles and Themistocles. At that point, the Greeks began to modify their identity, rediscovering their ancient Hellenic roots and starting to call themselves Hellenes, so Hellenic. With the fall of the Western Roman Empire and the barbarian invasions, so scholars focus on another phenomenon that I really believe it's very important and relevant to the theme of identities. That is a theme that is interesting us in this topic. So there are many studies on who exactly these Germanic people were who invaded the Roman Empire and established the Roman barbarian kingdoms, and who are also at the origin of our modern national identities. Just as the French took their name from the Franks, and Germany was called Alemania, but you say Allemagne in French, named after another Germanic people. The Alemanni, let's say Alemanni, it's an Italian term as well. And for example, Lombardy is named after the Lombards in the northern part of Italy. These peoples evidently had a significant impact on their sense of identity. So, who were these Germanic peoples who invaded the empire during the time of the barbarian invasions? Historians have been occupied with this question and have made some surprising discoveries, constructing an interpretation that is technically called ethnogenesis. So, what is ethnogenesis? Ethnogenesis refers to the process by which a group of people comes to be recognized or self-identifies as a distinct ethnic group. In this case, groups of peoples who built great kingdoms like the Franks, for whom Charlemagne, you remember, he was a great Frankish king, would emerge, or the Alemanni, as we already mentioned, the Alemanni people, from whom present day is Germany. Germany derives from that. So what is the history of these people and where is their past? Well, surprisingly, there is no information regarding them. All the information the Romans gave us about the Germanic peoples in previous centuries mention an infinite number of small tribes. So again, Tacitus wrote a treatise on Germania, where he mentions a multitude of small tribes, but the Franks are not there. The Germanic people are not there. The Lombards are not there. So what does that mean? All these people that appear on the scene, where do they come from? Looking closely, it seems these people were essentially created, these populations, these names, these identities were created at the time of the invasions. Let me explain. Germanic tribes living near the Roman Empire learned some really tough lessons to survive along the borders with Rome, and they couldn't stay as small and separate tribes. So incidentally, this is the realization that the Native Americans, for example, to change topic, also began they became when they came in contact with the Anglo-Saxon colonists, but they made it a bit late. Like they were supposed to unify to become a more unified nation, and they failed to do so here in the United States. And however, even there, they started to confederate, to connect, to create supra-tribal entities. And apparently the same thing might have happened with the Germanic tribes. And they did this in particular when they were on the move. And because when there was a chance to settle on Roman soil, to enjoy the wealth, the infrastructure, the cities, and the trade that existed within the empire. So these moving groups looked for leaders and formed bands or clans, even from different tribes at some point, and they invented the name for themselves. The names of these people are made up. So for example, the Franks doesn't just mean men, as we said earlier, but real men or the brave ones. And the Aleman is even more explicit. So if we think about it, Aleman, so what that means? All men. That's something really interesting. So these are slogans of leaders who were looking for followers, and to those who joined them, they were offered, among other things, an identity. This is perhaps the most striking example that identities can be invented and required a significant investment to be nurtured and strengthened. This is particularly true for these groups. When they succeeded in their invasions and settled on Roman soil, they built their kingdoms and suddenly found themselves faced with the Roman civilization they already knew. Now, being outside the Roman Empire is already challenging, but being inside is even more intense, is another thing. And they don't want to lose their distinct identity completely. They risk losing because they quickly abandon their own language for Latin dialects and their ancestral religion for Christianity. Still, they want to hold on to this identity even though it is quite new. They discover that to have an identity, one needs a past, and every Germanic people at a certain point has historians who poorly and in barely learned Latin try to write the history of that people to prove that it is a real people, to prove that their origins are strong and each one of them has their own identity. At first, this operation is practically carried out in collaboration with the Romans. In fact, the Romans are the only ones who have the know-how how to do these things, how to write, how to create records. And if we see the Goths, the Ostrogoths of Theodoric in Italy, entrust a Roman intellectual, Cassiodorus, with the task of writing the history of the Goths. Cassiodorus sets to work and writes the history of the Goths to prove that the Goths too have an ancient and glorious history like the Romans. When Cassiodorus completes this task, the Ostrogoth king, who rules over Italy and rules not only over his Ostrogoths, but also over the Italic population, naturally including the Roman population, He governs in collaboration with the Romans and the Roman Senate, which is still there. The Ostrogoth king goes to the Senate to praise Cassiodorus, essentially saying, quote, "Yes, he has shown me, dear senators, that your king also belongs to an ancient and illustrious lineage, just like you, and he has made the history of the Goths become Roman history." End quote. There is only one possible framework, Rome, and if a people wants to exist, they must be within that framework. The Franks do this as well, and they do it in an even more naive way, if you will, but it is very instructive. At a certain point, a scoop comes out. A Frankish chronicle says, quote, "Yes, we also have an ancient past. We come from... Remember the story of Aeneas who fled from Troy, arrived in the Lazio region, and from him came the Romans? We'll remember that, of course. Well, in France at some point they say, yes, there was also another Trojan prince named Francion who fled from." End quote. Do you understand what this means? So, telling the Romans, we are as valuable as you, we have an illustrious history, an identity that is just as valid as yours. And after that, the Franks become a powerful people. So, Charlemagne and the Franks are a people who at a certain point don't just aim to compete with the Romans, but of course intend to replace them, and they eventually will. They do. Now, Charlemagne, the king of the Franks, eventually goes to Rome and is crowned Roman emperor by the Pope, and is acclaimed as Augustus. Augustus was this term given to every emperor. The Franks took the place of the Romans, and the shift is reflected in their sense of identity and in the written texts. When Charlemagne was still a child, a prologue was added to the law of the Franks. This law was called the Lex Salica. This prologue is a celebration of the Franks that essentially states, quote, "I embrace the illustrious people of the Franks, founded by God, stronger in arms, faithful in peace, treaties, deep in decision-making, noble in body, bold, swift, and so on." End quote. Converted to the Catholic faith, they are immune to heresy because as soon as the Franks encountered Christians, they converted them directly to Catholicism without passing through other versions, as had happened with other barbarian peoples. They were extremely proud of this fact, which also provided them with a privileged connection to the Pope in Rome. That was a political decisive matter. And here they go for a while telling the story of how the Franks, indeed, the nobles of all peoples. Quote, "Long live Christ who loves the Franks. May he safeguard their kingdom and protect their army." Because this is the strong people who have shaken off the harsh yoke of the Romans and also have freed themselves from Roman servitude, and who, when they received baptism, they venerated the relics of the saints, those martyrs who the Romans had burned and thrown to the lions in the circus. Well, we have immediately revered them. So they built from the times of these golden reliquaries to protect these relics. And in other words, the Franks are not only competing with the Romans, but they're better. They think they are better. So with this phenomenon where people that never existed before emerge at a certain point, and in circumstances of political and military expansion, they have created a name, and they have created an identity that becomes attached to their identity and as the base of their creation as a group of people. And this is really the heart of ethnogenesis. So the birth of a group of people, they share a number of cultural values. So to resume what we talked about in this second episode here of ethnic identities, well, we've seen how all those barbaric populations that invaded the Roman Empire, they were split in multiple groups. And as we also know that these groups really had oral knowledge. They did not have, even if they had some we have some written evidence that they were writing on stone, for example. It was never the eloquent and elaborated work of the Roman or Greek poets or philosophers, not to that extent. Therefore, they understood that in order to survive, they needed to band together and create a name for themselves and make a history, create a people that you just saw that they could withstand the the caliber of the Romans. And because they came after, they made their own stories, created their own nations. The Franks, the Germans, and other groups, they could not survive by being separated. And also, as I mentioned, the Native American populations did not really create a cohesive group to withstand, or of course, it was maybe too late to do so, to create a confederation of all the tribes. Instead, he had this little groups trying to fight the advancement of the colonizers that eventually conquered the West. And they did so in 100 years or so. From the time they arrived on the West Coast here in the United States, they moved on the other side by conquering pretty much the current geography that we have here. So what does this mean? It means that groups want to be acknowledged, that groups to survive need to have a national identity, and they need to be together to face multiple challenges, or even to exist, or to call themselves something, to have honor, and to actually have pride. I don't know if you we still have this today. We are Americans. We call ourselves Americans, but we come from the United States of Americans. But we're really proud when we say we are Americans. So I am Italian. People really like to mention their places of origin because it gives them pride, and there's a lot of historical records, history, that backs that up. There's an entire culture. When you say Italy, what do you think? Well, you think about the Romans, you think about Vatican City, you think about, you think about 33% of the national treasures of art and history, they come from Italy in the world, so as most valuable places and beautiful places. Like, the art is astounding. You think about Michelangelo, Raffaello, Leonardo da Vinci. You just think about all those things, and all these things together come in this package that you call identity, where each one of us, it's proud to belong to. Now, would this be possible for a multicultural society where people come from all over the world, like it happened eventually in the United States? Well, the known term melting pot, like a nation created by immigrants, where a nation that was built by the hands of the Irish, the Italians, the Polish, and all those nationalities that came in the United States to find hope and to find a better life. Yes, that has been possible. But how far can you change the face of a nation without altering his costumes, his values, their cultural heritage? How fast can you do that? Well, that's something that we're really looking at it firsthand, because we have something like 8.5 million new people coming from the southern border. And how fast you're going to change a culture by having this swift, this magnitude of people coming in? So I think that immigration is a great thing, but people need to you need to have time to assimilate in order to be incorporated in this great nation and to keep on being proud of being called American. Well, this ends. Sorry for the little speech at the end. This terminates our second episode here, and all my notes and my historical work here was an excerpt from Professor Alessandro Barbero. He's a famous professor, history professor, university in Italy. He's a medieval expert, and so I am really leaning on his knowledge and reporting these facts here to you. Well, thank you very much, and don't miss the third episode of Ethnic Identities. It's going to be good. See you next time. Bye.